Before I talk to you about this entire conversation around Marco Rubio's statement, an answer to a question from an Indian journalist over the racism row, what I really want to focus on is India's, and especially Dr. S. Jayashankar's statement on multi-alignment. For decades, India has spoken the language of non-alignment, but what is quite interesting is that the External Affairs Minister, he's openly describing India's approach as multi-alignment, which essentially means that we are engaging all major powers simultaneously. How do you look at that statement? And is this simply a new label for strategic autonomy, or does it mark a deeper shift in how we, we see this, our role in a fragmented world order?
Well, thank you for having me. I think it's something that's been in the process for a while. Multi-alignment is a process that India started talking about, acting on for a bit since its Look East policy and then its Look West approach in the Western Indian Ocean, and then the entire alignment around the Indo-Pacific. I think what's been really tested in the past few years has been India's strategic autonomy, and therefore multi-alignment has come to somewhat of its rescue in the sense that you have a West which is increasingly torn on the idea of the Russia-Ukraine war. And then you had the Donald Trump phenomenon, which comes into office and tears the transatlantic glue. And then you have the Middle East happening, which again, tears India, brings the war in more proximal boundaries to India. So I think all of these successive events have tested India's strategic autonomy. What you're seeing right now is an attempt to diversify India's needs, and it conjoins with how India has traditionally placed itself on the power matrix, which is engage all sides, talk to all sides, and that comes increasingly valuable in an age of crisis like this, where the United States cannot talk to a country like Iran, right? I mean, direct diplomacy. So you have a Pakistan which has come into play, and so on and so forth. But India brings its own value of sorts in the Indo-Pacific in its own accord.
There is also a challenge of managing multiple countries at the same time for India. Because why I say this? Because India today maintains very strong ties with the United States, with Russia, with Europe, even with Iran, and even the competing power blocks at the same time. When you look at the situation right now, what exactly is happening around the world, the geopolitical tensions, they're sharpening globally. How sustainable is this balancing act, for India at the same time? Because there might come a time where, countries, they begin demanding clear alignments from India. How do you look at that situation right now?
Well, I'll give you two examples where it has stood the test of time. One is the Russia-Ukraine war, where I think, the pressure on Europe for energy, the pressure via the United States on India for oil, for buying the Russian oil. And then in the case of Iran, I think you have since 2012 and 13, you have an increasing pressure from the United States on India for curtailing its relationship with Iran. We might have curtailed severely the oil with Iran, but I think our larger relationship with Iran continues, and be it the Chabahar project and so on and so forth. So I think the worst is gone. You've been tested on two occasions: your strategic autonomy, your ability to balance amidst the largest crisis in the world has been tested, and yet you diversify. What you also do is you adapt. Meanwhile, in these crises. So in the past 4 to 5 months, you have certain Latin American countries like Argentina rise up in LNG supply to India. So I think, there is ways and means to balance, but I don't think there will be a greater pressure than what we have already seen from COVID-19 to Russia-Ukraine war to the Iran crisis on testing India's strategic autonomy.
Mr. Mishra, I also want to get your response on what Marco Rubio has said, especially about racism against Indians in the United States, because there is a general sense that, look, we are strategic partners, but there is a clear social disconnect on the ground as well. How do you assess Marco Rubio's response, where he says that there are stupid people everywhere? Do you see this statement as a diplomatic misstep, or is this an honest admission from Marco Rubio?
I think it's partly true, partly not, because what you see in the United States right now, for the past year and a half, 2 years, since Trump administration came to power, there's been a fracture in the U.S. society, in the sense of the politics of right. The conservative politics has divided itself in a very bizarre way. In the sense that some of these people are also criticizing Donald Trump. You have Megyn Kelly, for instance, criticizing Donald Trump for not being anti certain groups, xenophobic to certain groups. So I think you have a fracture within the American right, and the government obviously cannot afford to place itself on the wrong side of the spectrum. And what you're seeing in Rubio's enunciation is exactly that the government is being a government, while you see a fractured polity within the United States, which is much more, which could be much more dangerous.
Right. Let me go back to what we were talking about earlier about multi-alignment. Do you see this, the statements coming from Washington, from Marco Rubio, do you see this as Washington's calculated acceptance? I mean, has the United States made peace with India's strategic autonomy? Because despite the differences over Russia, over oil imports, the defense ties, with the United States, it continues to deepen partnership with India. Again, has Washington now accepted that India will never be a treaty-style ally, and instead it sees value in an independent India that still broadly converges with American interests?
Let me put it this way. I think there's got to be a recalibration in India's relationship with the United States, and the United States has itself sought a recalibration. When Christopher Landau was here in New Delhi, he said we are not going to repeat the mistakes with India that we have done with China. I think there is a clear recognition within the United States that all its relationship across the world, but particularly with major powers, China, India, and a host of others, is going to be very, very pragmatic. What does the other country or what does the other party bring to the table? I think that's the most standout question for the United States today. And I think you're facing this increasingly as you deal with the US today.
India, in the meanwhile, has continued buying Russian oil despite the Western pressure and the sanctions rhetoric. Did this particular episode prove that India today has enough geopolitical weight to pursue its own energy interests, especially without facing serious consequences from the West?
Well, I think so, because I don't think it is wise. It is the United States which has been propagating the China plus one strategy, right?
Yeah.
The idea behind such a strategy is that you don't concentrate your supply chains in one geography. Then how does it expect a country like India to really concentrate its supply chains in the United States? So countries like India will diversify, particularly energy-hungry countries like India will diversify, and that is the road future for the future.
All right. Mr. Vivek Mishra, thank you very much for speaking with RT India.
Thank you.